Hello, this is Robin again, the instructor for FHS 1500. This is Chapter 3, and we're talking today about infancy and toddlerhood. Really an interesting chapter. It's really quite fun. Let's talk first about some of the things that will be due for Chapter 3, and notice that there's a discussion and then a case study right after it. There are not discussions and case studies every chapter, but every other chapter. And then in between are your concept exploration chapters. So that's to save you time, but still to get, interesting concepts in your mind and stuff like that, making the class more worthwhile. So let's talk about discussions first. The purpose, of course, is to engage in classroom discussions, exchanging ideas with your classmates and things, which is very easy if it's a face-to-face class, but a little more difficult when it's online. So it's not going to be something you could just breeze through. It takes a little bit of time. First, you may want to read the posts that have been submitted by your classmates. If there aren't any yet, which sometimes they're not, we've made arrangements for that. So you'll need a total of 5 posts, and they can be in one of 2 categories or both categories or however you decide to balance it. First is to look at one of the main ideas from the chapter, which is in the study guide, and just find part that was interesting to you. You could copy paste a section, although you still have to talk about it, but talk about either an experience you had with that topic or things that you've observed or why it's important to you. But these types of posts are just where you generate. You go to the main ideas page and see what looks interesting or important to you. You could do all 5 posts this way, especially if you were one of the first people that are posting. The second way is respond to a classmate. So you read posts that another classmate has put and make sure that you push the reply button, and then you will put your response in with them. These are not like 1 or 2 sentence responses. They're from 50 to 100 words. You really have to kind of think through things. Please try to make them positive. You can disagree with someone and still say it nicely and support your point of view. Usually if you disagree with someone, just go on to a different post. Nobody wants their post to be totally disagreed with all the time. So, and then remember, every post has to be based on one of the main topics from the chapter. The second, oh, by the way, back on the discussion thing, if you read in detail where it describes it, it gives you more detail than I just gave you, but I just kind of gave you a basic one. The next assignment in Chapter 3 is called the case study, which used to be called observations, but now we call them case studies. Okay, you watch videos, the links are provided. If you choose not to watch a video, but you want to maybe watch and observe someone in your household or a friend of yours or something, you do need to get permission before you do that. Or just don't put their name, just put like person 1, person 2, that type of thing. And then what you're going to do is find examples that we've talked about in the chapter in each of the 3 domains. And you remember the 3 domains are physical development, cognitive development, and psychosocial development. And each age group, the book goes through and talks about it. And so you want to look and see what the book talked about and then go find it in real life or on the video. So, for example, if chapter 3 is like ages 0 through 2. So let's say some of the physical development it talks about are their motor skills, their gross motor skills. And so what you would do is go read about in your chapter the gross motor skills section, and then find someone who's a year or two and see if they have accomplished those gross motor skills, like walking, like crawling, just different things like that. Then move on to their cognitive development and see if you can find examples of cognitive development and then psychosocial development. So you do have to kind of know your chapter before you go on and try to find it in a real person or a video. YouTube has several other videos you can choose from if you don't like the videos that are in the assignment section. Okay, so let's jump into the chapter. The first section is on physical development, which will be part of what you can observe in your case study. But this is from your chapter, so we're beginning in 3.1. And at birth, the average infant weighs 7.5 pounds and is 20 inches long. Now, average is just what it says, an average, so there's nothing wrong, particularly if someone is heavier or a little bit lighter. And this is not like everybody must be within a certain criteria. If they're way off, then of course you would talk to your doctor, not AI. Okay, and the first year, the growth is pretty fast, especially the height, but it'll slow down a little bit in their second year. And by age 2, and this is one everybody tests because they never believe me, but it's true, the infant is half of his or her adult height by the time they're 2 years old. And it just seems crazy, but it's true. Okay, and growth is cephalocaudal, which means the head gets big first and then goes down the body. And that's why you'll see children in this age group with big heads. And you try not to say anything to their mother because the mother doesn't want to think her kid has a fat head. It's quite normal. Okay, and one of the ways that you compare your, I want to say specimen, but it probably is child, to other children of the same age, they have these charts, these medical charts, and they call them norm rankings, and they go from 0 to 100. So the doctor will say something like, your child their height is in the 80th percentile. And that means 79% of children of the same age are shorter than your child, and 19% are taller. And so it's just a way to compare. Again, if your child is at 10% height, it means they're short for that age group at that point in time. It's nothing necessarily to be worried about. My son was always 100% or more. So he was very tall. He's not extremely tall now that he's 40, but back then he was always 100% height and 100% weight, which means if you lined up 100 children that age, he would be the tallest. And he stayed the tallest for a while, but not, everybody will even out eventually, I think. Here are 2 samples of charts. And notice the top is stature or height, and the bottom part is weight. And these are averages. So your child is not on this chart anywhere right now. And it's age 2 to age 20. And what they do is then you get a chart like this, and then you will start tracking your child. And as long as they're within the lines drawn, they would be fine. So these types of things are ways for parents to keep track if, you must. A lot of times it doesn't really, doctor will keep track for you and will let you know if there's anything a little bit odd. Another part of development in this case is the brain. Obviously, there's no body part as important as the brain. As soon as the brain quits working, you're considered brain dead, which was not a nice thing to say, but it's true. Neurons, and you can see pictures of neurons, and then the right picture shows you neuron pathways and things. But neurons are your basic brain cells. They're pretty interesting. This next part is not on your quiz, but it's just interesting that you have one nerve cell down here going up to a receptor or another nerve cell. They don't ever touch each other to communicate, but they send electrical impulses across the gap, which is the synapse. The interesting thing is there are at least 100 billion neurons at birth. Billion. Running around in the little brain. And so we have lots. They just don't all get used and they don't all develop. But a neuron is the actual cell, and then dendrites are the things that grow off of it when the cell is used. Okay, so there's a thing called pruning, and this is what's important at this age group. It's not on your test, it's just important. The process where if you don't use neurons or dendrites, they shrivel up and they die. And so pruning is going to be healthy. Pruning is where your brain will cut off food supply or whatever to dendrites that aren't used. And that way there's more energy for the ones that you use. And there was this really cruel study decades ago where they put blindfolds on little kittens during the time that they were supposed to be developing their eyesight. And then later when they took off the blindfolds, because they were not used, the dendrites for eyesight had been pruned by the brain, and so then they never did gain their eyesight. I just hate that, but it's a good example as far as pruning. And so the more that you use your brain, the more that the dendrites will grow. And the less that you use it, of course, then your brain will prune them off. If that's an interesting topic, then of course read about it, because to me it's pretty fascinating. Scientists have also said that children who learn 2 languages or more, I think before age 3 or 4, will have the neurons and the dendrites for language learning and are able to learn many languages throughout their lives. When those who haven't learned a second language, it's harder for them to learn one later in life. All right, let's move on to sleep patterns. When the brain matures, the uninterrupted sleep gets longer. So you think to yourself, okay, newborns will sleep 15 to 17 hours. Well, that sounds like, okay, I can get a lot done in that amount of time, but they don't sleep all at once. They'll sleep in little cycles, hour or two, then get up and want to eat, and then an hour or two. And this is what tires out the parents so much. But they do sleep a lot, just not conveniently. This used to be called SIDS. Now they call it SUID. I imagine it probably can go for either thing, but it's when a baby younger than a year of age dies and you don't know why or the cause, and they do a full investigation. Investigators will try to figure out what caused them, including an autopsy, looking at the death scene, looking at genetics and all that. And if they can't determine a cause, then they may categorize it as SUID. SUID. So they recommend the same recommendations as SIDS, was sleep on the back with a firm surface, keep your soft bedding out of the crib. You know, there are lots of, if you're having a baby, you might want to read up on these types of things. So basically it has something to do with their breathing mechanisms. And so if it's something that is important to you, then of course study it a little bit more. We're going to go on with motor skills. And right away, babies, newborns have reflexes, which are things that are involuntary responses, like rooting, which is every time something touches their cheek, they'll turn toward that because they think it's mom going to feed them. There's sucking, there's grasping. Um, and these reflexes are tests of the brain development, or if they are missing, maybe there's some part of the brain that's damaged. One of the fun ones is the Babinski reflex, and that's when infants, when you stroke their feet, their toes will fan upward, and it's just fun. You know that as adults you still have reflexes, but a lot of them um, go away. Okay, gross motor skills are large body movements such as crawling and walking and sitting. And you say, when should my child start to walk by themselves? Maybe 12 months. Some earlier, some later. Again, they have gross motor skills charts. Your doctor probably has or can refer you to one um, online. I had one child that walked at 7 months, and it was a nightmare because the rest of them, like their brain wasn't developed enough to predict what's going to happen when you tip yourself at the top of the stairs and things like that. And my daughter walked at 12 months, and she didn't have any accidents and no stitches. So there's something to be said for both. It doesn't mean they're more intelligent if they walk earlier and less if they walk later. It's just what time their body decides. Okay, fine motor skills are smaller body movements like grasping and pinching and things like that. Um, Infants don't have very good fine motor skills, but they will gain control over their actions, like from reflexes to voluntary movements, as their brain develops and as their physical muscles and stuff develop. So let's talk a minute about the senses. Hearing. Um, Babies can hear in the last trimester of pregnancy, and so as soon as they come out, they have already recognized their mom's voice because that's what they've been listening to ever since their ears were developed. Okay, vision is the least mature sense at birth, so they probably see things a little bit fuzzier, which is why you might have to get up close for them to recognize you. Smelling. Infants can recognize each person's smell, and they prefer their mother. And they prefer to nuzzle right in the chest because it's a very familiar and comfortable place. As far as tasting and touching, infants like the sweet taste. Not all, but just kind of in general. The one thing with tasting and touching and all those types of things, infants need lots of opportunities. So if they want to bite a lemon, maybe, wash it off and let them bite it, and they'll learn whether they like it or not. You notice that when you feed certain baby foods to infants, they definitely have a response to some of them. And so this is all them getting opportunities to taste different things. If you keep everything away and you just feed them the same thing over and over and over and over, that makes it a little bit difficult for their taste buds to refine what their preferences are. And so you see the little boy there, chewing on a bell pepper. We don't even know if he has teeth to go through it, but there's a lot of things, like texture and all that, and temperature and things like that, that make it an interesting opportunity. So the more opportunities you can give your child, the better. Looking at psychosocial development is Piaget. and his sensory motor stage. He called it the sensory motor stage because they explore the world through their senses. So, sensory motor. One of the fun tests that Piaget has you do with your child or has you watch a video of if you're working with him is this idea of object permanence. At a certain age, when you have an object and you hide it, the child thinks it has gone away and doesn't look for it anymore. And then they get this idea of object permanence, meaning you have an object, you covered it up, but it's got to be in there somewhere. And so the whole idea of object permanence is a stage in Piaget's sensory motor. So that it's a development of the brain, it's a stage where you can see that the child is getting a little more and more mature with their brain activity. There are a lot of videos on object permanence on YouTube if you care to go look. And it's very interesting how different children react to different things. Of course, I was teaching this class as my own children were growing up, and I would play this with them all the time. And it was amazing how it's almost like one day, we put a toy and covered it with a blanket, and they just gave up and went on their way. And then it seemed like just the next day, the next week, then they'll lift up the blanket looking for it. And that's when, of course, peekaboo comes out and why it's so funny for the kids, and they laugh because they've got this idea that I know they're in there somewhere, And you can see in the picture there, the picture toward the top, where he drops a ball in and it comes out and it disappears for part of the time, and he's just fascinated. But there it is again. There it is again, and by the 150th time they've done it, maybe they get the idea. So that's a real fun one. Let's talk about language development. Usually you have reflexes first, and then they coo, which means they're kind of making just sounds with their mouth, and then they start to babble, and then maybe real words will come out when they're about a year old. And that's fun. They'll accidentally stumble upon the sounds for ma, and then everybody jumps and has fun, so they figure out what does ma do, and then they'll start going ma, ma, da, da, and they will learn very quickly from there. Interestingly, a holophrase is one word that gives a whole thought. So, for example, when they learn to say doggy, they'll say doggy, and that might mean I'm excited to see that dog. Or it might be doggy, where they're afraid of it. Or doggy, is that a dog? And as parents, you learn to interpret your child's holophrases. And there are children who are bilingual right from the start. Usually it's when one parent speaks one language and a different parent speaks the other language, and they grow up learning both languages, and they can do grammar correctly. There's a link at the bottom of this page too that will show you a video of children who speak, oh gosh, one of them was like 5 languages, and they're 2 years old, and they just know it from different people. So that's kind of an interesting thing. This next slide is not on your test, but it will be in the future, so I thought I'd just talk a moment about it. And that's theories of language development. This guy, his name is Noam Chomsky, and he's quite famous for his idea of a language acquisition device. And he says this is a mental structure that he believes people have in their brain that makes them desire to communicate. that we want to learn a language. We want to be able to communicate, and so infants will try hard to communicate. And it's quite interesting to read. Well, I think it's interesting to read his theories on this. The next one also is not on your quiz, but I think it's interesting at this time in our society about immunizations. What are immunizations for? And I'm not going to tell you if I'm for or against or whatever. I just want you to have some information so you can make up your own mind. Immunizations are usually shots, but sometimes they're liquid, um, and they're to give you protection against whatever you're getting immunized for. Like an MMR is a measles, mumps, rubella shot. And so, as a society, we've always been told to have immunizations for herd immunity. In other words, as a society, we want to protect each other so that our society, like smallpox, was almost wiped out because everybody had to get immunized. My father was in the military, so as an Air Force brat, we got all of our shots at school, and so everybody was immunized, and that's just how it was. Um, the MMR vaccine was accused of being the cause of autism for some people. And I haven't read much about it, but scientists say it does not cause autism. And again, I don't know if that's interesting to you, then you should read up on it a little bit. Proof of immunization is a requirement for attendance at public schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, Head Start, or child care facilities in Utah. You can get an exemption if it's a medical reason, a religious, or personal reasons. You have to sign paperwork and all that kind of stuff. There are certain immunizations before you go to kindergarten. There are ones before you go to 7th grade, and there are ones that you can get after 7th grade. Now, what happens if you don't immunize your children? You need to provide proof as to why you don't want to immunize your children. And then if there's a breakout of that type of disease and your child is not immunized, then they will not be able to go to school during that time period that the disease is going on. So we had a measles outbreak in other parts of the country, and so those children who are not immunized against measles were not able to go to school until the measles outbreak was over. This is a changing, evolving situation in our country, and you kind of have to make up your own mind about it. I would hope that you don't decide one way or the other without studying it out yourself. Okay, back to things that might be on your test. Erik Erikson, remember he is the psychosocial development guy that has a conflict that needs to be resolved in each age group. And the one for 0 through 2 years old is to trust versus mistrust. And if their needs are met, like they're fed when they're hungry, their diapers changed when they're yucky, they're loved when they want to be loved, then they learn to trust the world. And if parts of that are missing, then they learn to mistrust the world. Freud has some things kind of like that. Erikson says you can fix it if you weren't treated fairly. As an infant, it doesn't have to affect your whole life. Freud says it does affect your whole life. So 0 through 2, or infant, is trust versus mistrust. The next grouping is autonomy versus shame and doubt. That's not going to be on this test. But autonomy is independence, which is where your 2-year-olds will start doing I can do it myself kind of activities. they say, me do it. No, mom, I can do it myself. And they also start to hide when they've done something wrong. And so all of you can see these in children as they struggle with this back and forth type of thing. It's really quite interesting to watch. 2-year-olds will try so hard to be independent, and you do need to let them be independent in the things that they can do. One thing that doctors may bring up with you are temperament styles. That children are born with a temperament. Some are easygoing and kind of just happy all the time, and some children are more difficult. Nothing makes them happy, and they're just mad about everything. And then there are those that are kind of, they call them slow to warm up, kind of shy, and it'll take a minute before they decide if they like you or not. And those are temperaments that scientists say that you have that temperament style most of your life. Not that you can't change if you want to or anything like that, but the thing that comes naturally to you. And I think you can find infants with those different styles as well as adults. And it doesn't mean you have to fit into one of those 3 categories. It means that those are the 3 major ones, and you can fit in between any of them. And this is going on for a long time, so I'll try to hurry. This is a really important section on attachment and attachment styles. Mary Ainsworth is famous for her attachment styles, and that an attachment, by her definition, is a tie that an infant forms with the caregiver. So it could be parents, it could be the people that babysit the infant while the parents go to work. But there are certain attachment styles that we need to study. Secure attachment is where the child is comfortable and confident. So they notice when their mom leaves them, and then while she's gone, they'll play, and then when she comes back, they're excited to have her. That's secure attachment. And of course, there are like 4 or 5 types, and you don't have to fit all into one category. You can be bits and pieces. Insecure avoidant is somehow they haven't attached securely, and so they don't notice when their mom leaves particularly, and they don't really notice her when she returns. They're kind of avoidant. Ambivalent is if they're kind of needy, clings to the mom, really mad when she leaves, and they're mad when she comes back because she left. And then disorganized is they just don't attach much. They don't play well with others. They cry when the mom leaves, and they throw a huge tantrum when she returns. These do have a lot to do with your love attachments later in life, which, because I am so old, I've noticed that some of these fit me pretty well. There are certain videos on YouTube about how your attachment style as an infant affects your love attachments later in life. So here's kind of a chart from pre-marriage coaching that talks about the different attachments. Notice that fearful and disorganized are kind of the same type of thing. Your test doesn't have anything to do about attachment styles in adults, just with as an infant. So if you want to read those over, or that's an area you might want to study a little bit more. Notice that attachment in adulthood, when you're secure, you're comfortable, you're trusting, you communicate, you handle conflicts constructively. Those types of things carry over from if you were securely attached as an infant. Anxious attachment, it's where you crave closeness, you are you don't like rejection. Of course, nobody does. But you need constant reassurance, insecure, and those types of things. You can read those over later if you want to. And avoidant attachment is the same type of thing where you want to be independent. You don't like someone holding on to you too much. You suppress your emotions and you kind of avoid vulnerability. Disorganized attachments are those people that can't seem to hold on to a relationship because they're anxious. There's lots of conflict. They have difficulty trusting. Of course, I would hope we're not like that, but a lot of people are in different um, amounts. And not to say that you're weird and can't change and all that kind of stuff, but it's just an interesting theory that Mary Ainsworth came up with, and then people have studied the adults part of it on their own. So that's chapter 3. I know it's kind of long, I'm sorry, but I want you to be able to be prepared for the quizzes and for doing some of the activities that we have for you to do. I hope that thus far in the class you've been able to find some of the things either in your memory from yourself or from other people, watching them and seeing like infants do different things. And come back for chapter 4. Thanks.